This is Math 6, Lesson 1-3, Properties of Numbers. There are basically 4 properties of numbers that students need to be familiar with in order to understand mathematics. The first one is the commutative property. The commutative property says changing the order of addition or multiplication does not matter. For example, 3 plus 2 is equal to 2 plus 3. 3 plus 2 is 5, 2 plus 3 is 5. It does not matter what order you add things, the answer doesn't change. It does not matter what order you multiply things, the answer does not change. 4 times 6, 6 times 4, both equals 24. I either have 4 groups of 6 things or 6 groups of 4 things. Either way, I have 24 things. Commutative property, changing the order, comes from the word commute. For example, how you get to school doesn't matter. If your parents really wanted to, they could jump on the ferry, go to Seattle, drive through Seattle down to Tacoma, down through Tacoma, across the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, up through Gig Harbor, up through Port Orchard, and come all the way over here. It would be a long commute. It doesn't really matter how you got to school, as long as you get to school on time. It doesn't matter. How you get here doesn't matter. It's the point that you get here. The associative property says that changing the grouping of values when adding or multiplying does not matter. It doesn't matter how I group them. For example, if I have 3 plus 2 plus 5, I can add the 3 and the 2 first and then add the 5. Or I can add the 2 and the 5 first and then add the 3. Either way, I get 10. Okay, I can say 3 plus 2 is 5 plus 5 is 10, or I can say 2 plus 5 is 7 plus 3 is 10. Multiplication, same way. How you group them doesn't matter. 4 times 6 is 24, times 2 is 48. Or I can do 6 times 2 is 12, 12 times 4 is 48. How I group things doesn't matter. The easiest way to understand and not confuse these, commutative property, think of the word commute. Commute is how you get from point A to point B. Your parents commute to work if they go to work. Some of them it's an easy commute. Across the street, down the street, a couple blocks over. Some of them it's a long commute. Some of your parents commute all the way to Seattle, or maybe to Gig Harbor, or to Tacoma, or to Port Angeles, or some other places where their commute is fairly lengthy. As long as they get to work, their boss doesn't care how they get to work as long as they're doing it legally. Associative property is who do you associate with? Who is your group of friends? The people you associate with tends to be the people you group up with all the time. So remember that the associative property uses grouping symbols such as parentheses. The commutative property just changes the order of things. Only works with addition and multiplication. It does not work with subtraction and division. You cannot change the order of subtraction and get the same answer. You cannot change the order of division and get the same answer. You can't group division differently. You cannot group subtraction differently. Only addition and multiplication. Then we have our 2 identity properties. The additive identity is 0. You can add 0 to any number you want and it does not change your original number. 6 plus 0 is 6, 12 plus 0 is 12, 486,322 plus 0 is 486,322. It does not change the number. Additive identity is what number can you add to everything and not change it? That is 0. The multiplicative identity is 1. What is it that we can multiply any number by and not change the original number? You multiply it by 1. 6 times 1 is 6. 8 times 1 is 8. 48,000 times 1 is 48,000. So your 2 identities are what can you add to something and not change your final answer from your original problem? What can you multiply a number by and not change your final answer from the original problem? So the additive identity is 0. The multiplicative identity is 1. Let's take a look at how we're going to use the properties. If I'm going to use my properties, most of you probably do this and you don't even realize you do it most of the time in your head. You rearrange things to make them easier to add or to multiply. For instance, if I have 36 plus 25 plus 34, I'm going to rearrange this so that 36 plus 34 comes first. I want to group those 2 together and then add 25 to that at the end. You might say, why? And I can say, because I know 6 and 4 is 10, 3 and 3 is 6, so 36 plus 34 is 70. it gives me an answer which it ends in a 0, which is much easier to add. So if I group these two together, I get 70 plus 25, and then if I add these two together, I get 95. Notice how I show all my work. Even though you might be thinking this mentally in your head, I don't know what you're thinking. Therefore, you have to show me what your brain is doing. You do that by showing your work. Some people are like, that's a waste of time. No, it's actually really helpful for the teacher in case you make a mistake. I can figure out where you went wrong. I can see, oh, they're understanding this concept. They just had a small addition error. Or, holy cow, they did not understand this concept. I better go back and help them understand this concept. Let's look at number 2, 43 plus 15 plus 57. I'm looking at this, and I'm going to put 43 and 57 together first. Because if I put 43 and 57 together first, I know that 7 plus 3 is 10. 5 plus 4 is 9. Add a 1 is 100. This is 100. It adds it together really nicely to make 100. Okay. So if I have 100, I can just add my, where did I go? My 15, and I have 115 as my final answer. It makes it so much easier if you are understanding how you're going to do this. Okay, because 43 plus 15 plus 57. 57 and 43 is 100. Okay, so it works really, really well that way. Let's see. Let's look at some other things. Let's use the properties of multiplication. Let's find each product. 20 times 6 times 5. Okay. Now really, you can multiply them in the order that they are in, but it's probably going to be easier to multiply them in a slightly different order. For me, I know that 20 times 5 is 100. And if I take 100 and I multiply that by 6, that equals 600. That was fairly simple to do. Some people might go, but I know that 6 times 5 is 30, so 20 times 30, 2 times 3 is 6, add 2 zeros. That works too. You still changed the order. You decided to multiply 6 times 5 first and get 30, and then multiply it by 20. Either way works, we still got the same answer. But we manipulated it. I didn't go 20 times 6 and get 120, and then multiply that by 5, because that's a little bit harder. Not impossible, just a little bit harder. If I look at number 4 here, 2 times 17 times 50. My brain says take 50 and multiply it by 2 because 50 times 2 is 100. And then I can take my 100 and multiply that by 17, and I get 1700, or 1700, same thing. Okay. In this particular case, I used the commutative and the associative properties. I changed the order, and then I put 2 numbers together first that I wanted to multiply, and then I put the 3rd number together. All right. So see here, you can see this is the commutative, the associative part. I associated 50 times 2, got that to be 100, and then I multiplied that by 17, changing the order of the number, so that was the commutative property. Changing the order, commutative. Okay. Changing what I'm grouping, associative. I used both properties both times. You probably do this a lot. You just never knew there was names to those properties. You just did it because you knew it worked. All right. We're going to name the property of addition or multiplication used. This is a slightly harder process because now you're going to have to remember which properties they do. So let's take a look at number 5. We have 4 plus parentheses 3 plus 5 equals 4 plus 3 in parentheses plus 5. Did the order change? We have a 4, 4, 3, 5, 4, 3, 5. No, order did not change. But the parentheses did. If you look at this, the parentheses did change. I changed from 3 plus 5 to 4 plus 3 in my parentheses, which means my parentheses changed. My grouping changed. Which property uses grouping? The associative property. So this would be the associative property. And we have to say whether it was addition or multiplication, and since they did all addition here, this is the associative property of addition. In problem 6, let's take a look at it. We have 8 times 7 times 9 equals 9 times 7 times 8. There are no parentheses. So we know we didn't change the grouping. Let's see if we change the order. We have an 8, a 7, and a 9 in the left-hand side of the equal sign, and then we have a 9 and a 7 and an 8 in the right-hand side of the equal sign. So we changed what order we're going to multiply our numbers by. When we change the order, that's the commutative property. So this is the commutative property. And since we are dealing with multiplication, it's the commutative property of multiplication. So we have the associative property changes the parentheses. The commutative property changes the order of the numbers. And these are our properties of numbers.